The PS2 is one of my favourite all-time consoles, and a case could definitely be made for it being the greatest of all time. That's why when Aether SX2, the brand new PS2 emulator, was released, I went and bought a Poco F3 and a GameSir X2 controller just to make sure I could play my favourite PS2 games on the go. But now the Odin Handheld is here, and while the Poco F3 is awesome and powerful, there's definitely some great advantages to having a dedicated handheld. As I covered in the review, the Odin is simply the best emulation handheld right now, and in a market where every device has its pros and cons, the Odin has the least amount of negative aspects. When the Odin was first announced and people ordered the handheld on Indiegogo, there was no news of a PS2 emulator, so you could say PS2 emulation is a bit of a bonus. Now that it's here, how does the Odin handle PS2 games? In this video, I'm testing 20 PS2 games to see whether it's truly worth getting for PS2 emulation. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more of my gaming videos, and join our Discord and be part of a great community. For testing PS2 games, I'm using the Odin base handheld in high performance mode. This runs the processor at its unlocked maximum frequency and the fan at its fastest setting. You can hear the fan while you play without headphones, but with headphones on, it's hard to hear. Now you could play some of these PS2 games on the performance mode, which slightly lowers the GPU speed, but I'll let you guys play around with that for yourself. Games like Dynasty Warriors 4 or Devil May Cry 3 work fine, which will help you save battery life and reduce fan noise. However, generally speaking, many of these games play better and hold a more consistent frame rate using the high performance mode. I'm also running these games at 1x resolution and testing them at 4:3 aspect ratio. You should be able to bump up these games to a higher resolution. If you use an app called CPU Float, you can look at the GPU load or G load and see how much you're using. If you have spare capacity, say 50%, you can probably bump up the resolution. I did test some select games at higher resolution and widescreen. Also, I'm using a mix of PAL and US ROMs, and I've made a note of which ones I've used beneath the game title. I'm rating these games on my performance scale: bad, okay, good, and great. Bad, I wouldn't play on this system. Okay if you really must. Good is fine with some issues, and great has some very minor issues. I was asked, shouldn't great be reserved for perfect emulation? And it really depends what you're looking for in emulation. For me, I want to help you decide whether it's worth to play a game on this particular hardware, and a great rating simply means that it's going to be an awesome experience, but doesn't have to be perfect. I've tested 4 games already in my Odin review video, and here's a quick summary of how they played. Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition runs great, God of War 2 doesn't play well and it's slow. Gran Turismo 4 plays great, and you could play this just on the performance mode if you wanted to. Tekken 4 plays great too. Let's start with the first game, and it's Area 51, and the result is it plays exactly the same with the same problems as the Poco F3, which has the Snapdragon 870, and of course the Odin has a slower Snapdragon 845. Floor textures are missing, there's a fair bit of slowdown between 20 to 30 FPS, and underclocking doesn't help here. You could still play it, but it's not that great. Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance was one of my favourite PS2 games. Unfortunately, it's slow here. Now, the Poco F3 was also slow for the first 10 to 20 minutes, and then for some reason or other it suddenly seemed to play fine. But I was never able to get it to run like that on the Odin. I hope the Aether SX2 team can fix the issue here. Burnout 3 Takedown is really close to being great. I'm using the PAL ROM here to get close to a consistent 50 FPS frame rate. However, the game is averaging 45 FPS, and while it's lower than I hoped, it actually plays fine. It's possible there could be some improvements with the emulator in the future, as it's still in beta, so it could get better.
What's he sore about? I just said...
I'm disappointed that Call of Duty 2 Big Red 1 doesn't work and plays worse than the Gamecube version. Now, it actually runs best on MMJR 2, although it's not really that close to being playable there, as it's averaging around 15 FPS, but it still works to a degree. Here, there are so many graphical issues it feels like it's basically broken, not to mention it's running under 10 FPS. Colin McRae 4 isn't quite up to it unfortunately, and that's a big deal for me as it's one of my favourite rally games of that generation. It's running at 40 FPS and feels slow to play. You can hear it in the co-driver's voice as his commentary is slow.
It's a long foreleg. And 3 right opens long.
What? He's dead? Oh no!
Dragon Quest VIII plays with no problems, and here it has a widescreen option from within the game and it looks really good. The widescreen here isn't as good as native PSP games because text and icons aren't always properly resized, but it at least works without problems. Dynasty Warriors 4, as I said earlier, is an easier game to run and plays perfectly. This is probably my favourite Dynasty Warriors on PS2. Final Fantasy XII also has a widescreen mode in game, and it works okay, though with the HUD always on screen, those elements feel a little bit stretched along with text boxes. The game runs fine at 30 FPS. I'm using the PAL version of God of War, though you could definitely try the US version. The PAL version runs pretty well at a consistent 50 FPS. There are some moments where it drops to 40 FPS and even lower, but it's only for a very short moment and it doesn't affect the gameplay that much. I'm testing all 3 GTA games and we'll start with the original Grand Theft Auto 3. This plays great. As I mentioned in my Poco F3 video, the PAL version plays at 25 FPS and the US version plays at 30 FPS, and you'll see this a lot with many 30 FPS games. There's a big difference in how they play, so definitely use the US version in these situations if you can. Vice City plays awesome and runs at a smooth 30 FPS. This game looks fine at 1x resolution, but given how many of the objects have fairly low polygon counts and low textures, I thought I would try 2x resolution to try and improve how it looks, and it plays great at 2x resolution. Unfortunately, San Andreas couldn't complete the trifecta of great GTA games on the Odin because there are some emulation issues here. Most notably, it seems like there's a reflection that's been rendered here and it is quite distracting. That being said, the performance is fine, and given how popular this game is, I think there's a good chance of this being fixed. Metal Gear Solid 2 still looks amazing to this day and plays great on the Odin. While out in the rain the frame rate drops to 40 FPS, the game inside the ship is very smooth. Having tested 3 Need for Speed games on Gamecube and with none of them working well, I was really eager to try the same games on PS2, and for the most part it's better. This is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit 2, and the game runs great in general at 30 FPS, though there is some slowdown when it gets demanding, particularly with cops chasing you. Need for Speed Underground plays well, though there's some study here that is pretty consistent, and if it weren't for that, I would probably rate this one as great. Need for Speed Underground 2 doesn't play as well as the other 2 games. It hovers around 20 to 30 FPS when there are other cars around.
Freeze!
Resident Evil 4 is an interesting one. By default, the game already had black bars top and bottom, so the play area is kinda small. I used the zoom option on Ether SX2 to enlarge the area, though it looked a bit pixelated at 1x resolution. I increased the resolution to 2x, but then the game ran slow, so I dropped it back down to 1x resolution. I think between the Gamecube version and the PS2 version, the PS2 version probably holds up better, but you may want to run this at the default zoom level and 1x resolution. Smash Court Tennis 2 is probably my favorite tennis game of that generation. However, a lot of text isn't rendered, meaning that the career mode is going to be tricky to play, and it has a great career mode where you have to play year over year to reach the world #1 ranking. Hopefully the game will be fixed. I've done a detailed underclocking analysis video on Soul Calibur 2, so if you want to see more testing done on that game, make sure to check that out. As I said there, Soul Calibur 2 plays slow on default settings, averaging 40 FPS. However, if you use a 60% underclock, the game plays reasonably well, between an okay to good rating, depending how smooth you want your games to play. I've rated it as okay here, but I think if you're a Soul Calibur fanatic, you can definitely play through Soul Calibur 2 on the Odin. Finally, Tony Hawk 3, one of my favorite games on PS2, this plays great at 60 FPS. One thing to note about PS2 testing on Odin is that there are a lot of games that I tested already on the Poco F3 with the Snapdragon 870 that didn't work. Games like Soul Calibur 3, Kingsfield, Outrun 2006. I do recommend checking those two videos out as I tested 50 games there as well. So while there are lots of games that work on the Odin, just be mindful of the games that don't. Despite this, there are some massive titles here that run at a great, almost perfect level. GTA 3 and Vice City, Devil May Cry 3 Special Edition, Gran Turismo, God of War, Final Fantasy XII, Resident Evil 4, and more. I can honestly say, while there are games that don't work, the Odin is really a legitimate PS2 handheld, and there's potential for games to improve as development continues on the emulator. That's it for this one. If you like this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one.